When you step into a grocery store these days and spot a handful of bare shelves, it's easy to brush it off as a short-term supply hiccup. But heading into 2026, the real concern isn't if shortages happen anymore. It's about which everyday products vanish first. This isn't a video meant to stir fear or spark panic. It's about understanding the sequence of risk. Which items are most vulnerable to disappearing early, and which still have some flexibility left. And at the very top of that list is one product that, if it's gone, leaves families with no real backup. Let's get started. 12. Infant formula, especially specialized varieties. Infant formula doesn't end up at the top of this list because of panic buying or sudden spikes in demand. It ranks number 1 because even a minor disruption can wipe out supply across an entire region almost overnight. Formula, particularly specialized versions, isn't produced at massive scale. It's made in a very small number of tightly regulated facilities where safety standards, ingredient sourcing, and manufacturing processes are strictly controlled. If just one production line shuts down for routine maintenance, facility upgrades, inspections, or compliance with new regulations, supply can be cut instantly. Unlike most everyday foods, there's no flexible backup system waiting in the wings to fill the gap. But the deeper issue goes beyond manufacturing. For many infants, only one specific formula works. There's no swapping brands, no switching types, and no short-term alternative. When that exact product disappears from store shelves, parents aren't inconvenienced, they're stuck. One viewer summed it up bluntly. When formula runs out, it isn't panic, it's paralysis. That may sound harsh, but it's accurate. Unlike eggs, rice, or coffee, this is not an item that buys you time. A shortage doesn't become serious in weeks or months. Even a few days can turn into a full-blown emergency. What makes this risk even more dangerous is how unevenly it shows up. Some states may still look fully stocked. Certain stores continue to carry supply. That illusion of "we're fine here" delays awareness, causing many families to miss the warning signs until the shortage reaches their area. And once it does, there's no way to pivot or adapt. Specialized infant formula isn't high risk because it's uncommon. It's high risk because production is concentrated, the product is irreplaceable, there is no backup plan, and even the shortest delay can have serious consequences. That combination is exactly why it sits at the very top of this list. Shortages like this are rarely announced ahead of time. If you want to stay ahead of what's coming next, subscribing helps ensure you don't miss future updates. Now, let's move on to the next item on the list. 11. Frozen vegetables. For a long time, frozen vegetables felt like a safety net for many households. They were quick to prepare, affordable, and easy to store. You could stock up once, stretch them over time, and never worry about food going bad. But that same convenience hides a critical vulnerability most people rarely think about. This category depends far more on industrial processing plants than on farms. Frozen vegetables aren't just fresh produce tossed into a freezer. They have to move through a long, tightly timed process: washing, chopping, blanching, flash freezing, and packaging, all inside massive facilities that operate almost non-stop. When even one of those plants slows down because of maintenance work, staffing shortages, or equipment failures, the impact is immediate and widespread. The disruption doesn't hit a single store or even one city. Entire regions feel it at once. Multiple states can experience shortages simultaneously. And this is where frozen vegetables become especially fragile. There are very few alternative routes. When a processing plant goes offline, there aren't small-scale producers that can step in and fill the gap. Fresh produce can sometimes be redirected, but frozen vegetables can't. That's why when this supply chain snaps, shelves empty quickly and refill painfully slowly. These shortages are also easy to miss at first. You still see frozen vegetables in the freezers, but only a handful of familiar options remain. Prices creep up, bag sizes shrink, and suddenly, the value that once made them attractive is gone. For families who rely on frozen vegetables to keep grocery costs under control, this hits the monthly budget directly. One viewer shared a simple but telling adjustment. "I started buying fresh vegetables and freezing them myself. It's cheaper, and I have more control." That comment matters because it highlights a broader shift already underway. People aren't waiting anymore for shelves to look normal again. They're adapting on their own. That's one of the clearest signals of what the 2026 market looks like. When products depend too heavily on centralized industrial systems, trust erodes. Consumers move towards self-reliance, even if it means more time and effort, because they understand the problem isn't seasonal, it's structural. Frozen vegetables don't disappear because there aren't enough vegetables. They vanish because a single industrial link gets jammed. And when that happens, the people who wait the longest are usually the ones hit the hardest. So the question is simple. Are you still buying frozen vegetables the same way you always have, or have you already had to adjust? 10. High-protein Greek yogurt, large tubs. Many shoppers assume milk and dairy products are always a given, but high-protein Greek yogurt is a very different category from standard dairy, and it's far more delicate than most people realize. In fact, it's one of the most vulnerable items in the entire store because its survival depends on a perfectly intact cold chain from start to finish. This product doesn't just need refrigeration in a warehouse. It has to remain cold during transportation, at transfer points, and all the way through in-store display. If any part of that chain slows down, whether it's a shortage of refrigerated trucks, crowded distribution centers, localized power disruptions, or not enough staff to keep things moving, this item is instantly pushed to the bottom of the priority list. And when that happens, the first thing to vanish is the large tub. Not because big containers are unusual, but because they generate slimmer margins, occupy more shelf space, sell more slowly, and carry a higher risk of loss if they spoil. Under pressure, retailers protect the products that move fast and make more money, so stores keep the small single-serve cups. They're easier to manage, turn over quickly, and cost more per unit. Meanwhile, large tubs quietly disappear, even though actual customer demand hasn't changed at all. The most frustrating part isn't seeing an empty shelf. Yogurt is still there. At a glance, everything looks normal, but the option that truly works for consumers is gone. You can still buy Greek yogurt. You just have to purchase multiple small containers, pay more overall, and get less value for daily use. For people on restricted diets, older adults, or anyone who depends on consistent daily protein intake, large tubs aren't a luxury. They're the only practical way to keep food costs manageable. When those tubs disappear, protein expenses rise silently, one shopping trip at a time, until the end-of-month receipt suddenly feels off. This is the signature shortage of 2026. No panic buying, no viral photos of empty shelves, no obvious warning signs. Just a subtle shift that nudges consumers into higher price choices without notice. Large tubs of Greek yogurt don't vanish because there's a shortage of milk. They disappear because the cold chain system stops prioritizing low-margin products. And when that happens, the people who notice last are always the ones who pay the most. If large tubs are part of your routine, you've likely already seen this change unfolding. 9. Pure vanilla extract. There's a moment that plays out in countless kitchens. You open the cupboard, ready to bake, and everything seems to be in place. Flour, eggs, butter, sugar. Then you notice the small brown bottle is gone. Vanilla. The one ingredient nobody thinks about until the entire recipe suddenly can't move forward without it. Vanilla is one of the most overlooked staples in the kitchen, largely because it's used sparingly and often sits untouched for months at a time. But that low usage is exactly why its supply is far more fragile than most people realize. Pure vanilla extract relies on one of the most delicate supply chains of any common ingredient. Nearly all natural vanilla comes from a handful of growing regions, with Madagascar carrying most of the world's production. This isn't a crop that can be ramped up quickly when demand spikes or shortages appear. Vanilla plants take years to mature, require hand pollination, and are extremely vulnerable to weather conditions. A single major storm or an unusually timed rainy season can disrupt global supply for years, not just months. What makes vanilla shortages especially frustrating is the lag. When a disaster hits, shelves don't empty overnight. Bottles are still there at first. But slowly prices climb, bottle sizes get smaller, and quality begins to change without much notice. Some brands quietly dilute their extract or switch to synthetic flavoring, often without clearly telling consumers. Most people only realize something's wrong when baking season arrives, holidays, birthdays, family gatherings, and by that point, the damage is already done. Vanilla isn't an ingredient you can easily swap at the last minute. You can still bake without it, but the flavor never quite matches what you remember. This is a subtle kind of shortage. It's not dramatic or panic-driven. It stretches on quietly, fading in stages, season after season, year after year. And when you finally need it most, it's no longer there in the form you expect. If you've ever opened your cabinet and realized that exact bottle was missing, you already know the feeling. 8. Premium chocolate, high cocoa content. There's a strangely familiar moment when you snap a chocolate bar you've bought for years. The wrapper hasn't changed. The brand is the same. The price is a little higher than you remember. Yet somehow, the bar feels lighter in your hand, and that deep, rich flavor doesn't fully show up the way it used to. It's not obvious enough to complain about, just noticeable enough to make you hesitate. Chocolate isn't vanishing from grocery stores. The shelves are still full. But premium chocolate, especially bars with high cocoa content, is slowly being watered down in a way that's easy to miss. The issue isn't empty stock. It's that the very thing that once defined its quality is quietly being reduced. The root of the problem is cocoa itself. Most of the world's high-quality cocoa comes from a small group of West African countries. In recent years, extreme weather, crop diseases, and rapidly rising labor costs have driven cocoa prices to levels many manufacturers simply can't absorb. Instead of removing products from shelves, brands take a quieter route. The chocolate stays, but the cocoa content drops. What consumers see isn't a shortage, but a series of small changes. Thinner bars, lower cocoa percentages, more sugar, more fillers on the ingredient list. Prices, of course, don't come down. This isn't loud or illegal. It's a subtle, fully permitted adjustment that's difficult to spot and just enough to alter the experience. Chocolate often becomes the first place this kind of quality shrinkage shows up because it's considered non-essential, because comparing flavor precisely is hard, and because most people question their own taste before questioning the product. But once you notice it happening with chocolate, it rarely ends there. Today, it's cocoa. Next, it's coffee. Then cheese, olive oil, or any product tied to costly raw ingredients. Chocolate doesn't suddenly disappear. It simply stops being the chocolate you remember. And that shift happens quietly, one bar at a time. So if you've ever picked up a familiar bar and felt that something was off, it probably wasn't your imagination. 7. Organic eggs. Eggs themselves haven't vanished from grocery stores, but organic eggs have become unpredictable. They're on the shelf one week, missing the next, and prices swing so quickly that many households struggle to keep up. This is one of those items where just 2 shopping trips, spaced a couple of weeks apart, are enough to make the change obvious. Over the past 2 years, the cost of organic feed alone has jumped by roughly 40 to 50%. At the same time, energy, labor, and general farm operating expenses have all increased. With conventional eggs, producers still have some flexibility to adjust. But organic egg production doesn't have that cushion. Every input in organic farming is tightly regulated, and profit margins are already razor-thin. That means a single spike in costs can push the entire operation past the breaking point. This is why organic eggs are often among the first items to feel the strain. Not because people stop buying them, but because farmers can't absorb rising expenses forever. As pressure builds, many producers are forced to make hard choices. Some reduce their flock sizes. Others pause their organic certification or shift to lower standards just to stay afloat. One viewer captured the reality perfectly. Egg prices only make sense when farmers can still earn a living. That statement goes straight to the heart of the issue. When margins get squeezed too tightly, producing organic eggs stops being sustainable, and supply becomes unstable. For shoppers, the shock isn't seeing an empty egg case. It's standing there, weighing whether to switch from organic to conventional eggs instead. For families with young children, elderly parents, or long-established dietary habits, that decision isn't simple. But when a dozen organic eggs creeps toward, or even passes, double the price of regular eggs, many people are left with little choice. Organic eggs aren't hard to find because no one wants to raise them. They're becoming scarce because producing them properly is getting too expensive to maintain over the long term. And when costs exceed what the system can tolerate, the option that disappears first is almost always the higher quality one, not the standard alternative. If you've ever found yourself lingering in front of the egg case longer than usual, you've already felt this shift happening. 6. Whole bean coffee. Roasted coffee. No one is completely running out of coffee. Shelves still carry bags, and the smell of roasting is still part of the morning routine. But the coffee you rely on, the exact flavor, the familiar brand, the price that fits your budget, may not be there when you reach for it. The pressure point isn't cafes or demand. It's the beans themselves. Two major coffee-producing countries have recently been hit by severe weather events, and in just a single growing season, output in some regions fell by more than 30%. At the same time, transportation and roasting costs continued to climb. That combination forces roasters into tough decisions. Many trim their product lines, dropping slower-selling or lower-margin blends and keeping only the options that move quickly or generate higher profits. This is where coffee drinkers feel the impact first. Not because coffee disappears, but because their coffee does. The bag you've been buying for years is suddenly missing. The replacement costs more, tastes different, or both. And for a lot of people, coffee isn't just a beverage. It's the anchor that starts the day. When that routine gets disrupted, it's noticeable right away. One viewer shared a practical workaround. Coffee can be vacuum sealed and frozen, and it stays good for up to 2 years. That detail matters because it reflects what's happening in the market. People aren't panicking. They're getting ahead of the curve. When the right coffee at the right price shows up, they buy it intentionally and store it, instead of waiting until they're forced into an unfamiliar option. Coffee is a perfect example of what shortages look like in 2026. There's no dramatic collapse, no empty shelves, just a steady loss of familiar choices. When costs pass a certain threshold, the habit of drinking coffee doesn't change. What changes is which coffee you can realistically count on day after day. If you've ever walked into your regular store and found the coffee you've been buying for years suddenly unavailable, you've already experienced this shift firsthand. 5. Rice. Large bags. Rice hasn't vanished from grocery stores. You can still pick it up week after week. But if you pay close attention, the first thing to go isn't the rice itself, it's the large bags. And the people who notice this early are usually the ones who are used to buying in bulk. The product looks the same. Same rice, same brand. What's changing is the size and the price. 10 to 25 kilogram bags slowly get replaced by smaller 2 to 5 kilogram packages that cost 15 to 30% more per kilo. There are no announcements, no out-of-stock signs. The bulk option simply disappears without explanation. The reason is straightforward. Large bags are closely tied to stockpiling behavior. As transportation, storage, and inventory financing costs rise, retailers shift their focus to items that move quickly. Smaller bags sell faster, generate higher margins, and carry less financial risk. Large bags do the opposite. They take up space, turn over slowly, and serve long-term buyers. And that's the key issue. Rice still fills the shelves, so most shoppers don't see a problem. But for families who rely on large bags to save money, plan ahead, and avoid frequent shopping trips, this change is a real loss. It's not about running out of food. It's about losing control. One viewer shared a clear example. I couldn't find the 50-pound bag at Sam's Club and had to settle for a 25-pound bag at a much higher price. That comment highlights the real issue. Rice isn't scarce. Choice is. This is what shortages look like in 2026. You're not skipping meals. You're still cooking rice every day. But stocking up the way you used to is no longer easy. And once that ability disappears, consumers are quietly pushed into more frequent purchases, exactly what the system favors. Rice doesn't disappear. But when bulk bags are the first to go, it's an early signal that the market is shifting direction. If you used to buy rice once a month and be done, have you noticed this change yet? 4. Premium cooking oils. Olive oil, avocado oil. There's a subtle but unsettling shift happening in 2026. You walk up to the cooking oil aisle, the brand looks familiar, the bottle looks the same. Yet when you flip it around, the origin has changed. Spain this time, Italy last time, and before that, a country you barely recognized. The oil hasn't disappeared, but its consistency has. Premium oils like olive and avocado rely on a handful of very specific growing regions. One bad drought, A wildfire or a shift in seasonal weather can cut production by 40% or more in a single year. When that happens, the market doesn't halt sales. It simply switches sources. And the consumer feels it first. The aroma is different, the flavor slightly altered, the texture may even change. It's not fake, but it's no longer the oil you're used to. Many viewers have noticed this firsthand. One said, "I gave up butter and switched to olive oil." And suddenly, even that trusted staple became scrutinized. Prices spike double digits in a single season, bottles shrink, labels change faster than ever, and that comforting sense of control in the kitchen starts to slip away. The tension here isn't about running out of oil. It's about losing certainty, no longer being sure that what you're buying today is the same product you bought last month. When millions of households adjust their cooking habits simultaneously, supply tightens immediately. No dramatic shortage is needed, just enough unease among buyers shifts the market. So if you've noticed that the olive oil in your kitchen doesn't feel quite the same as before, you're not alone. Leave a comment. It's likely that many others are noticing the exact same thing. 3. Breakfast cereal, large boxes. It's a typical morning. You open the cabinet, reach for your usual cereal, and suddenly realize finding it was pure luck. Cereal hasn't disappeared from stores. Shelves are still stocked, boxes are still colorful, but that one box you've relied on for years, the familiar flavor, the ingredients you trust, the large family-size version that lasts all week, is quietly disappearing. The problem isn't ingredients running out overnight. It's margins. Over the past year, the cost of wheat, corn, sugar, and packaging has jumped 20 to 35%. When costs rise, companies face hard choices. They streamline their offerings, keeping only the fastest-selling, easiest-to-produce lines. Niche flavors, specialized formulas, and large boxes are the first to go. That's why you might notice something slightly off. The brand looks the same, but options are smaller, fewer, and often priced nearly the same. Protein, low sugar, and whole grain lines become harder to find. It's not that people stopped eating breakfast. It's that manufacturers are simplifying to stay profitable. One retail manager summed it up perfectly. "We're not out of stock. We're out of slow sellers." The impact is real for families with young kids or older adults. Changing cereal isn't simple. Habits are set, digestion is accustomed, and mornings are already rushed. Now there's the added stress of picking the wrong option. If you've noticed your usual cereal suddenly missing from the shelves, leave a comment. Chances are, it's not just your store experiencing this quiet shift. 2. Chili sauce. Chili sauce isn't something most people think of as at risk. It's not a staple, it won't keep anyone alive, and yet, when it's missing, its absence is felt immediately. A familiar meal is ready. Eggs, noodles, leftover rice, whatever it may be. And then you realize one small bottle is gone. Suddenly, the meal doesn't feel complete. Chili sauce often experiences seasonal shortages because chilies themselves are highly weather-dependent. A single heat wave or an unusually timed rainy season can slash crop output by 30 to 35%. But the bigger challenge isn't the peppers, it's the packaging, glass bottles, plastic caps, and the bottling lines themselves. When production slows, chili sauce isn't prioritized. Factories shift focus toward faster-selling, higher-margin items. That's why chili sauce vanishes in such a frustrating way. Full shelves, 1 week, gone the next. Months later, it might reappear at a higher price, in smaller bottles, or with a slightly altered flavor. One viewer described it simply, "Not dangerous, but it makes me feel unsettled." And that captures the essence of chili sauce shortages perfectly. It doesn't leave you hungry, but it disrupts the sense of normalcy in everyday life. Even small items, when unstable, trigger alertness in the brain. That's why chili sauce ranks among products that provoke a surprisingly strong emotional reaction. Not because of cost, but because of taste memory. Everyone becomes attached to a certain brand, flavor, and level of heat. You can switch to another bottle, but the meal no longer tastes quite the same. If you've ever sat down to eat a familiar dish and realized the one bottle of chili sauce you count on was missing, leave a comment. Often, it's the smallest things that make people notice the market is quietly shifting. 1. Highly perishable fresh fruit. There's a familiar scene playing out in supermarkets in 2026. The fruit section still looks vibrant, not empty, no panic. But your hand hesitates. You glance at the price, do a quick mental calculation, and then put the fruit back. Fresh fruit isn't vanishing completely. It comes and goes. What's disappearing, though, is the ability to buy it consistently. Strawberries, blueberries, grapes, imported oranges, items that once made it into your cart week after week, have become items you stop and think about before purchasing. Prices can swing 20 to 40% in a single season. It's not about a drop in demand. The culprit is rising cold chain transportation costs, post-harvest losses, and unpredictable weather patterns. Fruit is the most delicate category in the supermarket. One delayed delivery, a few hours of power loss in a cold storage facility, or an out-of-season rainstorm in a growing region can wipe out an entire shipment. Retailers don't stop selling. Instead, the cost shifts to the buyer, and that's where people feel it first. One viewer put it quietly, but truthfully. I don't run out of fruit. I just don't buy it anymore. That's the most dangerous kind of shortage, not empty shelves, but broken habits. When fresh fruit turns into an occasional purchase instead of a weekly staple, it affects health, family meals, and even food security. This is why many households are adapting. People are buying less, choosing sturdier varieties, or switching to frozen fruit. Not because they want to, but because they have to. When something once considered essential for health becomes a financial burden, the market has shifted to a new phase. If you find yourself buying less fruit than before, not out of choice, but because it no longer feels reliable, leave a comment. You're likely not alone. Many people are feeling the same thing quietly. In 2026, the key isn't panic buying. It's understanding the order of risk. What can't be replaced, what still has alternatives, and how to adapt. You don't need to stockpile excessively. You just need to prepare wisely. Leave a comment and tell us which items are hardest to find in your area right now. We'll keep updating together. Thank you for watching.